Hi, I want to make a video on how things are still, I mean, this is something you can understand to a certain extent. Anyone can understand, and that's the idea that even if something's good, like the intention thing, the intention doesn't matter as much to a certain extent, and it doesn't matter the outcome, sort of like it doesn't matter the intention, it's about what happens in the end. It's a matter about the effect. If something happens, the intention matters. Now, when the intention doesn't matter. If something happens, the intention doesn't matter, obviously, to life, to reality. Obviously, if you're trying to dissect a murder case or something, it means something to us to a certain degree, but life doesn't mean much of anything. It's just a bunch of interactions. The circumstance is all we can blame. Um, and the circumstance takes the credit, and the circumstance is all we can blame, but we can't blame it. We can't wring our hands around their neck. We can't find a way to put the circumstance in jail. We can only find a way to put the things being victims of their circumstance in jail. And that's all we can do. We can only punch the person in the face that's the victim of the circumstance. We can't catch the circumstance and just do anything because there's nothing that creates the circumstance. The circumstance is the thing that creates everything. And we can't do anything beyond the circumstance. We can fight the circumstance, nothing. We can't do anything against the circumstance. We can only fight the things or deter against the things or interact with the things being victims of a circumstance. We can't do anything beyond the circumstance. The circumstance is the only thing that we can interact with. And this is the things being controlled by the circumstance. I mean, they're the only things that we can interact with. And the circumstance is the thing that needs to be blamed. The circumstance is the thing that takes credit for it. But we're the ones that are at that circumstance. Our existence is the circumstance. Everything is the circumstance. And the circumstance only means something to a living thing when you're taking credit for something, say, that you find positive, only because it means something to you because you're alive, and it wouldn't mean anything to you if you were dead, or you didn't exist to begin with, if the circumstance didn't create you. If the circumstance creates you, you're obviously being a victim of the circumstance. And there's only victims of a circumstance when there's some kind of value, some kind of sentience, some kind of reciprocating, some kind of feeling, sentient being experiencing positive and negative states, but mostly running away from negative states and chasing states to avoid negative states. You're either chasing something to avoid negative states, or you're just flat out avoiding negative states and skipping the chasing thing to avoid negative states. Because many times you think, oh, I'm so excited, but it's because you're excited because there's a great deprivation in you to create that excitement. So it takes something to make something. Is what I mean. It was what I'm saying. It takes something to make something. It takes to makes. Yes. So it's still stupid. Yeah, it's still stupid. So like I was saying with the intention, it doesn't matter to life, the unbiased life game. And it's still, making a risk, taking the risk. Taking the risk is still stupid, making a stupid decision, even if it turns out well. Obviously, to a certain extent, what is well? Well, by whose circumstance, whose description? Well is only non-existence, and that's the thing that creates the well that we can create. The greatest well that we can create, the greatest good that we can create is prevention. That's all we can do. Prevention is all we can do. That's the well we can do. And when you don't prevent, say, another life, a stupid risk, a stupid thing, that even if it turns out well, will end up turning out bad. There's only so much you can do to make it turn out well, and the only well you can do is prevention. And when you're taking a risk, let's say like procreation, to use an example, say doing something stupid, even if that turns out well, the only well that can be created is prevention of that thing to exist to begin with, preventing the things that were created to begin with, and it's about mitigating against something happening in the future. And it's better for you to do it than, say, bringing someone else into this world to do it. At least if you understand, you can take the burden on yourself as opposed to, saying, making another victim. And even if it turns out well, it doesn't mean that your decision wasn't stupid to begin with. You made a risk. You ran the red light. And even though you got away, it doesn't mean it wasn't a stupid risk to take. It's still a stupid risk to take. It's still a risk that you took. Like having a kid is a risk you take. Even if you feel like the accomplishment's there, the risk is still there. Even if you feel like it's mitigating against something else, the risk still exists. Because that risk, like anything else, when you're intentionally making a decision, consciously making a decision, to be more precise and practical with this, make it more human in describing the circumstance. With intention, it still exists, the risk, regardless of what you may find to be a positive outcome in reaction to that risk that you've taken. The risk still exists. If you feel like there's something that you can do about that risk, you don't need to bring another life into this life game. So the phone's ringing. So anyway, so that doesn't matter to a certain extent. But the risk matters. That risk is still existing. And just because you feel like something positive may happen doesn't mean that the risk doesn't exist. So, like intention, I've mentioned this before. That doesn't mean the intention doesn't mean anything to life. But like I was saying, to practically make this make more sense, is an intentional choice that you make. Intention matters to a certain extent. I guess that's a distinction to make. Intention does matter to us, and risk does matter to us. And the risk isn't always intention means something to us, but not to the life game. The circumstance, intention doesn't matter to the circumstance. We can only react to that intention in that circumstance and change that circumstance. We're just parts of that circumstance to create a different thing. And a risk is still creating an intention. You can intentionally create the risk, but the thing is you intentionally take the risk. It doesn't mean that the risk wasn't taken. So that's a good way of intermingling those two. Intention and risk, and you took the intention to make the risk, and the risk is still stupid even if the risk was you found worth it. So it's still a risk you're taking, but more describing to the life game. A risk doesn't. Risk still exists even if it turned out good. Intention doesn't matter even if it intention doesn't matter even if so intention doesn't matter if something happened. So if something happened, intention doesn't matter. It's still a stupid decision, even if the outcome of the risk that you took, the knowing risk that you took was stupid. And we're obviously victims of risk all the time in our circumstances. So I think that maybe that's really all I need to add. It's not really a hard idea or a hard concept to grasp. It's a very easy concept. It's nothing all too interesting. It's still a risk that you're taking. Intention and risk. You intentionally have a kid. I mean, it really can go down to having kids and procreating, and that's really obviously about trying to prevent something happening and procreating to a general degree, regardless of what you may think you're preventing. Creating another Einstein or someone that's going to be the world savior doesn't mean that you're still not taking a risk. You're taking the risk because you never know how it might turn out, and just because it turns out to be great doesn't mean that this decision that you made, intention that you made, intentional decision you made wasn't a risk to begin with, because it can have always turned awry. It can have always gone bad. There's no predictive quality to existence. We can't predict. We can only predict so much, and we can only predict inside of reality. We can't use a crystal ball and look outside of reality, because the crystal ball would just allow us to change the reality that we predicted. We can only predict knowing beforehand certain circumstances that don't involve us. We can only describe certain circumstance by a predictive quality of understanding possibilities, and to a certain extent our understanding of a contrived idea of a probability. That's all we can do, and that's a distinction between that and flat out seeing a crystal ball, and that's a distinction I want to make, and that's why I was thinking about it for a second. There's distinctions in making those descriptions. There's just different distinctions in making those distinctions. So yes, we predict the existence, we self-fulfilling prophecy our existence by within our existence. We don't look outside of existence, say using a crystal ball, because reading the crystal ball would only allow us to change the existence anyway, and that would be outside we can't look forward outside the existence, and looking, say, through a crystal ball would be, say, looking outside of life, outside of existence, but that's the intention, is looking outside a light of existence. But that's another contrivance. You can't look forward in life without creating a paradox, or a contrivance, like I was saying. The very setup is a contrivance, and the very thing in effect, the very concept of thinking as a crystal ball outside of existence, or using it inside of existence, expecting a different an outcome, doesn't mean that you can only it's a contrivance. The crystal ball is a contrivance. Looking into the future is a contrivance. Having expectation. This goes back to the risk thing. This is off of the risk thing I was mentioning. Looking forward and having predictive quality about what you can prevent and what you can expect. Crystal ball is intended to be outside of reality. So you have a crystal ball. You can read through the crystal ball. Predicting the future, time travel, things like this are based on false premises. They're based on contrivances in themselves, and the reaction they have is based on contrivances as well. The interaction that exists is a contrivance as well. You can only predict using probability and possibility. And reading a crystal ball inside of our reality or reading tarot cards doesn't mean anything beyond just using probability and possibility and recognizing that, and almost in a way self-fulfilling prophecy, to look at life and use possibility and probability and have yourself convince yourself of something happening a certain way based on those probabilities and possibilities that exist in your knowledge of how things are going to happen to a certain degree based on your knowledge of existence or your knowledge of your circumstance. We can only use our possibility and probability to predict so much, and the quality, the contrivance of thinking that something works outside of reality that we can see and yet somehow not change. We can see the future yet somehow not change the future is a contrivance. We can see the future yet somehow not change it. We may not have control to a certain extent, but we have more control than that. And the control is just another interaction of me defying the very reality of something happening a certain way. That can't exist. The contrivance of a crystal ball, of something happening outside of existence, me seeing something beforehand and not being able to change it, things like that. All that's built on contrivances. And my reaction to that is a contrivance. My expectation, it can't exist. It's built a false premise based on false premise based on false premise only leads to a dead end. You're not leading anywhere. You're just going to lead back to a logical circle. You're just going to go around in a circle and a circle, and you're not going to find that you're getting anywhere. And it doesn't lead anywhere, but back to ground zero. You're not going to find anything beyond the same old circular argument that you keep finding. So, say something like predicting a risk or an outcome, you can only do so much, and you can only use probability and knowledge and understanding. Things are going to happen a certain way, but that doesn't mean you still can't predict what's going to happen, because they're going to happen a certain way, and you can predict now. And just because it's deterministic is no defense that you can't predict and prevent something from happening. Because it happened because of determinism, and it's because it happened doesn't mean that you can't make something not happen. Something's going to happen a certain way, and you're part of it, and since it's going to happen a certain way doesn't mean it's already happened. You're still making it happen. So you therefore have an effect on the things that are happening. You're not just going to sit back and let cereal make itself now, are we? In the morning when you have your breakfast, you have to make it. Otherwise, your cereal is not going to make itself. Sorry, you're not going to have breakfast that morning. Sorry, it has to be made by someone. You know how it caused. You know how cereal is going to make itself, and it's because you have to make it yourself. So it's just based on like time travel and things like that. It's just a bunch of ideas that we can understand, that we can mutually understand, even though to a certain extent it's just a description. It's based on false premises, based on an inaccurate way of describing things, and like word and language, words and our interaction of speaking, of mutual understanding, and how different interpretations between what I mean and what someone else interprets, and that distinction between, and the fact that it's built on false premises on top of an inaccurate way of describing things. Because reality describes itself, and this exists as just another interaction. It doesn't mean anything beyond the interaction. So it's just another self-description of reality. Reality describes itself, and when you make false premises, and you just stack false premises and false premises based on a language that's based on just crap anyway, or just a description of way of communicating, doesn't mean much anyway, even though it exists and objectively exists. It exists as an interaction, it doesn't exist as anything else. And the fact that we can't even mutually have the same distinctions or understandings is proof enough of that existence or that circumstance. So the crystal ball idea, it can be applied to time travel. We understand time, we understand travel. We combine two ideas. Time, move forward, backward, therefore it's travel in time, like we could travel in a vehicle. You combine traveling in time, moving forward instantaneously, a contrivance in and of itself. Is there an instantaneous? No, there's not an instantaneous. There's just movement. Something happens based on something else. There's no instant spark that just happens. Unless you want to theoretically talk about something like the Big Bang or something, which I would say to a certain extent necessarily happened that way necessarily. But I don't even want to get in that cup bag of beans. Anyway, so yeah, it's just based on a bunch of mixing of ideas and false premises and confusions and contrivances, and you just build it and build it and build it based on an inaccurate way of describing things, which is anything but reality. And since it's in reality, it describes itself. I'm describing what I'm saying right now by just existing, when it's not describing, say, the wall the best I can. That's why even if we describe it, there's not necessarily the best mutual understanding between me and the description that I'm trying to relay to someone else, because they may interpret it differently. My description only means something in and of itself, and me describing the wall and as existence. But it doesn't mean anything because it's just an interaction. And that comes down to the futility of existence and the pointlessness, at least, of existence. Not necessarily futility, but pointlessness of the redundant processes and just the same old interaction that happens no matter what. It just exists in and of itself, and that's really all it does. Even if it does, there's nothing beyond its existence. Even if there's something beyond the mystery, what the mystery? Once you get to the mystery, what now? Nothing. Yeah, you get the mystery. Whoa, okay, you're going to be whoa forever? No, you're going to be whoa, now what? Yeah, that's all you're going to be doing. There's no whoa forever. It's whoa, then dead, or it's whoa, now what? Whoa until I die, or whoa, now what? Whoa, now what? That's a good title. Yeah, that's a nice little tongue twister. Whoa, now what? Yeah. So anyway, yeah, like the crystal ball thing I was mentioned, expecting outside of reality, describing inside of reality. There's only predictive qualities that we can use. Applying those predictive qualities to something outside of it, knowing beforehand and yet not being able to change it, doesn't exist, as if it were outside, inside our knowledge, but outside the existence of reality. It doesn't exist. It's a bunch of contrivances. You can't do that. You can predict. It's always a risk no matter what you do, and that's the case no matter what. So that's all I want to say, and I might write that title down anyway, so thank you. That's all I have to say. I might write that title down anyway. So thank you, and until next time, bye.